Welcome to Undressing Intimacy, where we cut through the bullshit
Greggy,
so we can get naked.
you can't say that.
Why not? How would you say it then?
Well, maybe more like, welcome to Undressing Intimacy, where we undress emotionally so we can undress physically.
That's exactly what I said. Not sure what the problem is. Welcome to episode
Number 15.
We're really excited today. We had one of our listeners send us a message and a question about one of our episodes that we want to follow up on. And we normally don't want to just read here because that might get boring, but he put it so very well. I think it's good to read what he put. What do you think, Emily?
I think that's great. I also want to say thank you. I have had several of you email and share your appreciation and your gratitude, and I want to say thank you back to you. It is a little bit vulnerable to get on here and talk about all these things, but we do it because we really want to be honest and open about where we're at and also to help you. And so it's worth the sort of vulnerability hangover. And I just want to say thank you.
Yeah, her oldest daughter's sister-in-law is like, isn't it so cool your parents have a podcast? And my daughter's like, I'm not sure I want to listen about my parents' sexual life. And we laughed. I said, it's nothing else that you haven't heard anyway, but it is kind of vulnerable. So thank you for the support. It does encourage us and help us do this, and we really enjoy it.
And we hope that you feel like we're just like you. We're not talking to you above or talking down to you, because honestly, we really are just like you.
Oh man, we've made all the mistakes.
We've made all the mistakes, and really we're just hoping that we'll help to be able to give you some maybe course correctors so that you can avoid some of the pitfalls that we have openly fallen into.
Yeah, we're truly lucky to be in this position, right? With Amy reaching out and learning about life coaching, it really led us down this. And that's really the difference, right? Her learning about life coaching and how we can be able to share this with us is the only difference than us who are floundering around and making all these mistakes. We've learned, and we hope we can help you with some of our scars so that you can have a little less than us. You'll probably have some, and you probably have many already, but maybe you can heal from them a little quicker. So you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
This is what he wrote in. He says, I think there are many people that are like me and my wife when someone might open up about things like I did early on in our marriage, and they are met with disgust or disapproval by the spouse that isn't ready to know the truth or handle that truth. And it is crushing if the spouse sharing it isn't in a healthy place where Greg is to know that it is not bad, disgusting, or wrong. Even though my spouse may think that or not understand it, I was not, capitalized, equipped to handle my wife's rejection of my appetites in our marriage before we're working with Amy. And my wife's inability to validate my sexuality was absolutely crushing and traumatic because I myself hadn't accepted this part of me. And I was expecting her to make it all okay and good and healthy and super sexy.
Which doesn't happen, by the way, ever. So if you're feeling like this client of ours, just know that your other spouse will never give that to you.
Right. And he continues on to say, I think many of your listeners may listen to episode 6 and think, all right, I'm going to get the courage to share my desires with my spouse, to be open and honest and connect like Amy and Greg did, which is amazing. I hope they do. But if they do so before they have fully accepted their own sexuality and are open to the real possibility that their spouse will not likely receive that and respond the way they hope, it could be devastating.
And it is.
Yeah, this is exactly where we're at in the place we're at, right? And I really want to spend some time today talking about what does it look like to understand and accept your own sexuality?
To integrate it as an integral part of your identity and self.
Right. We've gone over this several times. I think I've told the stories of how important it is to integrate it and accept it, but we really never stopped to talk like this listener asked us to do, to go through the detailed steps of what it looks like to be able to integrate that into yourself and accept yourself and your own sexuality, because he is absolutely right. If you have not done that and you're willing to be vulnerable and open with your spouse, oftentimes it's going to be met with misunderstanding, disgust, not acceptance. Now, we're lucky we have Amy on this side because she's gone through that side, right? And she can talk a little about the lower desire partners, what that looks like and why they may think that way and what they can do to avoid that. But first of all, we want to talk about the higher desire person. How do you come to accept your own sexuality, and what does that look like? What are some questions you can ask yourself to make sure that you're in a good place? So when you take this to your spouse, and they, even if they are good at this, even now, there's certain things Amy doesn't really go, let's go do that. That sounds like a great idea. That I have to hold on to myself and know that I'm okay, that I have that desire or want. It doesn't make me bad. And it's okay that she doesn't want it either. But you really have to be in this place before. Are we ready?
Yes, let's do this.
I think the number one most important thing is the removal of shame. So we were brought up to be shameful about sexuality. We were taught that our desires were bad if we did not harness them, that we could destroy our families and other people around us, and that we were carnal in nature, and God gave this. Well, God didn't give this to us, but we have this, and if we don't use God's power to harness it, then it will be bad. Over the years, I've come to find out that God just didn't give us the power to harness this. God gave us this great power. And it's a life-living power that's important and can actually create way more than it can destroy. But we have to be able to understand that ourselves. So the first question I think you need to ask yourself as a higher desire person is, do I still have shame around my sexuality? Now, that doesn't mean that we can't misuse our sexuality, and we can't have disappointments, and we can't feel bad about the way we misuse it. But shame never is something that helps drive us forward. It helps tear us down, tells us we're not good enough. There's something wrong with us, and it keeps us from going where we need to go.
Right. Shame is that I am bad versus this choice or decision or the way that I chose to interact with my sexuality was bad. Right. And when you're thinking you're bad, that you're fundamentally flawed, then you don't have the capacity or even the desire to try something new or to look at it in a different way. You just think you're bad and you're broken. If you are thinking the way that I interacted or the way that I chose to be in this part of me was not helpful, that actually gives you a lot more leeway to approach how to integrate and interact with your sexuality.
Absolutely. In fact, we're listening to schooling or a class about sexuality, and the person that was teaching this workshop really said something about that struck me. So oftentimes we're so worried about making that mistake or doing something that we feel might destroy or be bad. But everywhere else in life, we have the ability to go down and do something and say, oh, that wasn't right. Let's turn around and not do that, or let's retract that, or let's do something else. But we think in sexuality that if we do that, we'll be in a place where we can't. And that's just not true. We're grown adults. We have the ability to be able to look at things and say, hey, this is healthy for our relationship and my sexuality, or this is unhealthy, and be able to make a decision from that point. The shame is what stops us from doing that, because it says you're broken and there's something wrong with you. And it doesn't allow you to step into those things and discover really what's right for you or wrong for you.
It makes you powerless.
Yep.
Right.
I had told this story many times. I'll tell it again. It was me flying into Salt Lake City on a business trip. I was sitting on the tarmac taxiing to the gate, and I was listening to a podcast, by the way, one of our favorite podcasters who we're going to have on later this month. So I'm not going to give away the secret, but they'll be joining us. And they were talking about this. And it was the first time ever in my life that I'd heard someone tell me that I wasn't disgusting, that I wasn't deranged, that there wasn't something terribly wrong with me. In fact, they were teaching me that there was something very much right with me. And the feelings and desires that I had were very normal and natural. And it was that time when I started looking at myself very differently. Now, this didn't happen overnight, right? It's not like I got off the plane and said, woohoo, no more shame. This is great. And I called Amy up and said, I don't care what you think about my sexuality. I'm okay with it. And it didn't happen that way. It took a lot of hard work. But really, I think it's the first question to ask yourself.
But I do think in that moment, I'm going to counteract you just a little bit. I do think in that moment, you fundamentally shifted in your understanding and view. And so even though you maybe didn't have all of the immediate behaviors to follow that, the way that you saw yourself, the way that you saw your sexuality fundamentally shifted in that moment. And I make that point only because oftentimes as I'm coaching clients, they do come to that moment of fundamental shift. And that doesn't mean all of a sudden everything after that immediately falls into line. But from that point on, they are fundamentally different.
Yeah. No, it was a major change in my viewpoint. And I was fundamentally different in the way that my sexuality has set me on the right path.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just don't want to set people up to think like, oh, I asked this question and I answer it and then it's all done
Right.
or
No,
never
there's
done.
there's still work to integrate that, but I think when you have that fundamental shift, you now are deconstructing old ways and reconstructing new ways. And yes, that reconstruction does take some time, but the shift is immediate.
And why this is so fundamental is like our listener said here, right? When you're willing to be vulnerable and be honest, and this is the only way to truly have an intimate relationship, right? So if we're hiding anything from our spouse or keeping it to ourselves and not sharing with them, then they don't know who we really are. So they can't really choose us. And that's what we ultimately want, is to be chosen. And when we choose each other, that's when we become intimate. And so me hiding all my desires and the thoughts and feelings that I'm having about my sexuality for Amy didn't allow her to know who I really was. I was faking. I was being fake and I was hiding
Which
from her.
doesn't allow you to feel loved
Right.
because you know fundamentally that you're not showing up as
Right.
you. And even though I am loving you and receiving you, you know that you're not showing up.
Yeah, there was always the question in the back of my head, if she knew these things, she would not love me.
Hmm.
And so I was hiding from them. And if you have that thought in your head, if she knew these things, she wouldn't love me, then you're really not allowing them to choose and love the person that you are.
This was the primary problem with porn. It was the hiding and the untruth and not bringing your sexuality to the marriage, but taking it to another place.
Yeah, because it was so not integrated. We're going to talk about integration a little bit, which means Amy's like, well, give me a definition. I'm like, I've been integrating things for 25 years at work. Like this, I'll give you my work definition. How does this work? And I said, when we do software, we have different components in the software that each do a piece of a thing, but separately, they really don't accomplish anything. When we integrate them together and they work together, then they accomplish that task that we're trying to do for our software. I think it's the same in our life. We have emotional well-being, physical well-being, and there's this sexual well-being. And each part of that plays a role in who we are. And when one is stuck out there or hidden and not integrated with the others, then we're not totally integrating our sexuality. And that's when it comes out sideways, as we talk about. Porn was a good example of that. I didn't have anywhere to accept my sexuality, use it. And so it was a way for me to go looking to have that acceptance. And it was a cheap way and the wrong way, but it was a way for me to look for acceptance in my sexuality and be able to express my sexuality that didn't cause me to be vulnerable with it.
Right. And that lack of integration meant that you had to emotionally hide, you had to physically hide, and you couldn't be fully present. And I was thinking of how can I explain integration to our listeners? And I think integration is when you take a fundamental part of you, like Greg said, we have parts, we have emotional, we have mental, we have physical, we have spiritual, we have sexual, and you allow them to all work together for your greater good. You aren't giving that ownership to someone else. You say, this is my responsibility. You may not have control over the genetics, for example, you were given, but you still have a responsibility to take care of yourself physically, to integrate your well-being there, right? You may not have control over the mental patterns that you were raised in or the beliefs you were given, but you do have all the control over what you're choosing now and how you choose to believe and how you choose to support yourself mentally. It's the same in sexual. You may not have control over the beliefs or the way you were taught or the ideas that you were handed. You may not have control over what your fantasies are. You may not have control over whether you're higher or lower desire, how your desires present. It's true, you may not have control over that. However, you do have all of the capacity to say, I am responsible for this, and this is what I want to create with it. Whether you're low desire, high desire, whether you have all the libido in the world or none of the libido, whether you have difficulty with different dysfunctions sexually, you still have a responsibility to see how can this contribute to your well-being.
Yeah. So again, the fundamental step, I think, the question to ask yourself first is there shame around my sexuality? And as you dig into that and understand what it is and how you can overcome that, it's going to take some work to do it. We work with clients all the time to kind of discover this and understand why. And it's not that we are sitting there saying, everything's okay, you don't need to be shameful about that. That's not our job. Our job is to allow them to be in the open and honest and think about it and understand what it means to them and help them make a choice, right? We all want to be fundamentally sound in integrity when we make our choices. This is where we help them understand what's causing the shame and why and what they're going to do about it and the choices they're.
And in part of sexuality is actually our physical body, right? And so many men and women that I meet with have a lot of shame around their physical body. It should be this, it should be that, it should be different. And while there is physical well being, it doesn't always show up in the ways that we are presented in our culture. For example, women are often portrayed as being sexual or sexy or attractive when they have really full breasts. And maybe you are a very healthy person, but you don't have full breasts. Or men are being portrayed as attractive with a six pack of abs. And maybe you are very healthy and active, but you don't have a six pack, right? And so part of integrating your sexuality might be integrating the body that you have, the body that you've been given, and learn that it is your container to experience your sexuality. And the container doesn't have to look a certain way to be able to express your sexuality.
Absolutely. So higher desire, folks, I want you to take a moment to stop and think and see where the shame is coming up around your sexuality. If you can name it, understand it, work through it, and get to a place where you're in a steady spot. Just as our listener talked about, that he did this work and he did get in this steady spot. Let me tell you, this couple was on the verge of divorce 100%. He had gone through an emotional affair and it was over. And Amy was really able to work with both of them and help them be honest with themselves and come to a place where they could handle each other's truth and be able to decide to choose each other. And they're a thriving couple, and it's wonderful to see. And so higher desires, take some time to go think about this, understand where that shame is coming from and how you can work through this. Now,
Wait, I have a comment there. So in the shame, there is often a pivotal experience that happened somewhere in your teenage years, in your younger years, in your young adult years when your sexuality was developing. And often a part of working through the shame is revisiting that experience and seeing what it was you didn't know or understand or didn't have access to at that time that you can now give that younger self to help heal that shame. There are often very pivotal experiences. And I know we had another podcast that talked about going back to those experiences and walking through them and seeing what it is you're grateful for in them and what they have taught you. And so a lot of undoing shame often requires us to go back to those pivotal early experiences and revisiting them. And if you need help doing that, you've got two coaches who are happy to do that with you. But that's often a crucial part of working through shame.
yeah, absolutely. I can think of mine right like that. You said
Exactly.
that, so
Yes.
I know what it is. I want to pivot a little bit and still talk about this fully, but I want to talk about it from the lower desire perspective, because as you're listening to this as a lower desire individual and you have a spouse that's a higher desire, you're maybe thinking, oh boy, there's something going on that I didn't realize. So what are some of those things, Amy, a lower desire person can do to help invite their higher desire spouse to look at themselves more fully and understand their sexuality and remove some of this shame?
Well, first, I'm going to say they can support their spouse, but often what they need to do is more their own work. And often the lower desire, their work is around seeing sex as performance and pressure, seeing sexuality only as a place where they have to work, where they have to show up to take care of their spouse. And I think one reason that lower desire spouses don't want to hear about their higher desire spouse's desires is because it just means more pressure to perform and more work. And so I think even to be able to create space for a higher desire spouse, you have to be able to untangle that meaning of performance and pressure and know that your sexuality is yours. It is not meant to be a way to take care of someone else. It is an integral part of you for your own pleasure, for your own enjoyment, for your own replenishing. And so when you can first establish that, then when your higher desire shares, you can hear it and recognize this is how their sexuality is presenting. And that is beautiful for them. And you don't have to become all of their desires.
Yeah, I mean, that's hard, right? Because we're taught, one, we're taught to judge a little bit, right? To, hey, we got to draw a fine line between what's evil and good. And if we let any of that evilness sneak in, it's going to destroy our marriage and be part of this. And because sexuality is misunderstood and not really known, there's even, Amy talked about a little bit, like fantasies. Like, uh, again, our favorite
They kind
coach
of
says that
live
a lot
on
of
the edge.
a lot of fantasies should never see the light of day, right? That's just not how they are. And so there's a lot of confusion around that. And so when these things are brought up, we're in the middle of judgment of, well, is my higher desire spouse doing something evil, or they do something bad? And then, like Amy said, if they bring this to me, then I'll be expected to do more. And this is something that's added to my task list of doing. And that just creates a vicious cycle. We were in that cycle, right? Me
A
trying
cycle
to,
of servicing and
yeah,
duty. And it really takes all the joy and desire out of sexuality, which is meant to replenish and help us feel alive and rejuvenated. And in that framework of performance and pressure and servicing, there is no replenishment, there is no aliveness. And honestly, our bodies as a lower desire spouse, they shut down, they turn off, they freeze, they close off that capacity to feel the erotic energy. And so it's not a good path. Um, and a lot of the lower desire spouses, the question that I ask them to help them integrate their sexuality is, why would you choose for yourself to be sexual? And their first response is usually, oh, to keep my spouse happy. No, 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 no. Why would you, for you, of your own free will, just for you, choose to be sexual? Choose to engage in sexual activity, of whatever that is. And they often have to really think and search. And as they find that why is what helps them integrate. Why do they want this part in their life? The same way with physical and mental and emotional and spiritual and financial. Why would they choose to integrate this part into themselves?
yeah. And much as you said before about there's a moment in life that's caused this thing to happen for the higher desire. I mean, I remember coaching a lower desire individual and asking them to fill out, we say top 25 desires, but I knew this individual was struggling. So I even said, just give me 10. I just want you to write down 10 desires that you have. And as they brought these desires to me, they were all about their husband,
Mm-hmm.
their kids, their family, people at church. And I said, these are none of these belong to you. These are all everyone else. What's one? And we spent several minutes in silence trying to think of one. And that's often where we've been taught something's happened in your youth that have showed you that I need to shut this side of me down.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not for me. This is for someone else I need to serve. And if I'm serving, then I'm being godlike. But I'm sorry, if you're serving in this way, it's not godlike.
It's not. It really has to be a personal integration. You need to have a personal why, a personal idea of what it is you want to create with this part of you. You need to know that. I think high and low desire, because often the high desire is actually trying to take or get something. They're usually trying to get the feeling of being enough, the validation from the lower desire. And the lower desire is trying to take care of the higher desire, trying to caretake in a way that helps them feel like they are sufficient. And so, really, it is part of that integration is really integrating your own sense of self, your own identity, your own ability to allow the sexual part of you to be a good part. And also your mental and your emotional and your physical, right? If you're going to integrate, like you said in your software, they don't stand alone. They do all combine together. So if I have my sexual integration, I'm also emotionally thinking, how do I want to feel during this sexual experience? I'm mentally thinking, where do I want my mind to be, right? Physically, I'm taking my body and saying, how do I want to feel about my body in this experience? And relationally, I'm thinking, what do we want to create together in this, right? It is an integration of all of them, not just, I want this to be okay, or for a lower desire, I have to do this for them to be okay.
Yeah, I think that takes us to the next. There's always a yin and a yang or a balance of these things, right? And if I think my mind of the place you need to be able to express this to your spouse and move forward in this area, there's the one area of let's take the shame away. And that kind of opens up and gives space to understand what your sexuality is and how you want to step into it. But there's also the ability to corral that and make it something good, right? Because if you just open it up and accept it, it can often find itself in places you don't want it to be.
That's the lack of
That's the
integration,
lack
right?
of integration.
You removed the
So,
shame, but you still haven't integrated it
right.
yet.
So the first question I want you to ask yourself is around the shame. But the second question I want you to ask yourself, how do I want to use? Okay, I understand I have the sexual desires and it's my sexuality is good and there's nothing wrong with it and I'm okay with it. But now how do I want to use that to do? How do I want to use that to bless my life and bless the lives of those we love the most?
What do I want to create with this part of me? What do I want to create personally and relationally?
Yeah, I still find myself now if I am having the thoughts of I want this or I need this or I have this great desire and it's really singular against me and what I really want. If I go down those threads and those pathways, they usually don't end up very well for the both of us. And when I step back and say, oh, I have this desire, how can I integrate this with Amy and bring her in? Where's the joy that she'll find in this? How do I collaborate with her? I think that's a great word. I just had a coaching the other day about this, and the higher desire person was kind of upset because, like, whenever the lower desire person wants to have sex, bam, it's good. Like, they decide. And when I decide, it's like, well, no, we're not going to do this. That's not fair. And I asked some questions like, did you tell the lower desire person that you actually are having these thoughts? Well, no. Did you suggest that you may want to? Well, no. I'm like, then you're not collaborating. And it
You're
really,
not
you're not
inviting.
inviting. It struck him really hard. Like, you're right. I'm not collaborating. I'm here sitting on my own thinking this and then disappointed when it doesn't happen. But oftentimes I'm too scared because of the rejection to ask and collaborate. And so it does take time to be able to get over that, to be able to ask and collaborate with it. But sex is very much better when it's in a place of collaboration. Those fantasies that you have when it's not one person working to fulfill another person's fantasies, but when you're inviting them to enter into the fantasy.
As themselves with their own
Yep.
desires and
And
their
not
own
change.
preferences.
Yep.
Yes.
And not change to be that way. That's when those become fabulous. And it may not be the exact fantasy or way that you thought it might be. But I promise you, when I go to the end and push the way I thought it should be, they're oftentimes not the experience I was looking for. But when I invite Amy to come in and I share that with her, and it may not be exactly how I played it out in our minds, because we have, right? We've got it down. We know exactly what it looks like and how great it's going to be. Then those are the times that are just the best because we can
Really,
collaborate together.
from the lower desire perspective, I can feel when you have this preconceived plan that really is
Sometimes you even
asking.
ask me, what's the plan? Well, I can't give it to you. I'll mess it up.
When I can feel that expectation, I can feel that plan, and that does move me into the framework of performance and expectation, which is not a good framework. I don't know how many times we have faced that and how I can express to you that is never a good plan.
It still happens. It still happens. It just
It
happened
does
recently, right? And
not work.
it doesn't go away. I think we still try it because we go fall back to some of those bad habits. We just recognize it a little faster and understand what's going on there and can stop ourselves or afterwards go, okay, wait, that wasn't what we planned. But you're exactly right. So,
I
Amy, how do you get in that place, right? Because I don't know, this is a little frustrating with me sometimes because we feel like we have to make the high desire has to make all the things. And you just asked me the other day, like, oh, how do I put this? Like, we have to be the ones to do, I'll put all the work in on how this is going to work because oftentimes those ideas and thoughts and things do not even come to your mind. And so how do you work in a collaborative way from a lower desire perspective to allow those things to come to you, to be suggested and find ways you can integrate it, but maybe also work on your own and find ways that are helpful for you to bring some of these ideas to the table that can be part of the sexual relationship?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of the lower desire first has to find that they want to be sexual. That I can't emphasize how important that is because if you don't first choose wholeheartedly to be a part of the experience, then you will move into performance and servicing. And I think um, then as suggestions or invitations come, it is to look inside yourself and listen and say, am I willing to try this? And have the space to recognize that it may or may not work, right? Again, removing that performance expectation allows you more freedom to try. I think in the same way that higher desires have to invite and be free to hear the yes and no, lower desires have to be able to take in that invitation and have the freedom to say yes and no, even within themselves. And so many of the lower desires just focus on the no. But once you have an idea, once you know why you would choose to be sexual, that's your first choice. And then the next choice is this something I'm willing to try? Is this something I'm willing to engage in? And often I just had a client email in and he suggested 69 and he was like, "Hey, and can you try this instead of this?" And when she received it, she thought, "Oh, he's expecting something." But honestly, he was really just inviting her to collaborate. And she thought within herself, yeah, maybe maybe I can try that. Maybe there's room in me to try this because I'm not in a performance place, because I can say, well, let's try it and see what happens, right? From an agentic position, like let's choose and see. I think what's harder for the lower desire partner is they don't always have the desire when they're being asked or invited. And so they have to kind of take that step into the dark. It is literally a step into the dark. But if the first choice has already been made, like, yes, I do want to be sexual, then the second choice of stepping into the dark to see if this is possible, if this is something they enjoy, if this is something they want to participate in, becomes a little less scary.
Yeah. I like how you said your no's have become maybes, not nows, maybe later at this time. Let me think about it. How do I want to accept this? Those have been the ways that you responded, and that's become collaborative and all, making all the difference in the world.
Yes, because now I know that I do want to be sexual, first of all, and it's not about performance or work. And so knowing that I can still have a no, right? Like there are still times I'm like, yeah, my body is like totally out. Mind, body, emotions, they're all out. But I would like to try here or at this point, or how about this? Or how about another night? Or how about another activity, like maybe naked cuddling or something like that. I do, because underlying that is, yes, I do want to be sexual. I do want this to be a part of myself and our relationship. And that still means I can have a no.
Yeah. And just as we talked about the higher desire person hiding themselves and not being able to be chosen, I think it's the exact same way on the low desire person, right? If you are doing this in a performant way at all, you are not allowing your higher desire person to feel chosen, because you know they know you're doing it out of obligation. And there is nothing worse in this whole entire world than having sex with someone that's doing it out of obligation. If you are a decent human being, you feel like you just took something from somebody. And that is the worst thing in the whole entire world. The person that you love the most, you just took something from somebody. And so you're setting your partner up to do that if you're not being honest as a lower desire person and communicating to them what your true desires are and stepping into those. So just as the higher desire person is hiding and not allowing them to choose and being intimate, the lower desire can do the same by being performant or doing it out of obligation.
I think both sides really have to work on that solid sense of self. Having an identity, knowing your why, knowing again that being sexual and your sexuality is a part, a good part, removing the shame, that's all part of having that solid sense of self that allows you to collaborate. Because in order for collaboration to exist, you do have to have yes, no's, maybes. Well, let's try this and see, right? Collaboration doesn't just mean everything is a yes. Collaboration means that you have all the possibilities of all the honest answers. All of it is on the table.
When that honesty is from a higher desire person, you're good with it, right? It doesn't mean anything about you. It means you're collaborating, and that you need to allow them to have that yes, no, maybes to be collaborative, not because there's something wrong.
And from the lower desire, it means that they're honestly showing up too, not just saying yes because they feel pressure or saying no because of the same pressure.
Yep. All right. I'm going to throw this at you again because you avoided the question.
Oh, sorry.
No, I don't think you did it intentionally. And I don't want to ruin anything we just said, because I think all the things we just said are totally 100% right and things need to be worked on.
Yes. Tell me.
But there's
Ask me.
no greater fantasy
Yes.
from a higher desire person
Yes.
than not having to be the one that comes up with the suggestion.
Yeah.
And that the lower desire person takes their ownership of their own sexuality and desires and what they want. And they bring that to the table in collaboration. I'm getting
It's the
fluttered right
ultimate
now.
it's the
I
ultimate
might be
fantasy.
getting, just thinking about it. It's the ultimate fantasy, because that means not only has that lower desire person taken ownership of themselves and their own sexuality, but it also means they're willing to bring it to the table and that you're not the person that has to think about it. So let me ask you again,
Yes.
how, as a lower desire person, can you own your sexuality enough to be willing to bring things to the bed?
Yes. It's a great question. Owning my sexuality enough to bring things to the bedroom. I think it requires often for a lower desire a little bit of exploration or research, whichever word you're more comfortable with. Sometimes that exploration or research happens in the form of novels or books that you feel comfortable with or shows that you feel comfortable with. And that exploration and knowledge is about finding the themes or the ideas, or another way to say it is the fantasies. Often when I say fantasies, though, people have these long, drawn out ideas of what fantasies are. A fantasy can just be, I want to feel chosen. It doesn't,
And this makes me feel chosen, so let's do
and
this.
this makes me feel chosen. It doesn't have to be a full scene, although it can be. So that's why I kind of am careful with the use of that word. A fantasy can just be, I want to feel like I can attract your gaze and keep it and am worthy of it. And so when you find those ideas slash fantasies slash things that you enjoy, then that can allow you to bring them to the bedroom. But I will say this often means that the higher desire has to be a little bit calmer,
I was just going to go there. You stole my thunder.
because if they are always pursuing, hey, is it now? Is it now? Is it now? Is it now? This lower desire doesn't even have a chance to make the offer. And so it means often that the higher desire has to calm down a little bit and allow themselves to receive, because even though they think it would be the best idea, there's a lot of anxiousness and the waiting to receive they're not willing to do.
Yeah. Again, you stole my thunder, but I'll let you steal it because I love you.
Thanks, babe.
There's nothing more that has turned me on when I found out Amy was researching and finding these things. About blew my ever living mind, and I got really excited. Well, then I messed up. So I'll tell you what I messed up. And this is what Amy's talking about. I found out she was researching and doing these things, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, that's so exciting. And I was out of control. And I'm like, we got to try this. We got to try this. We got to do this. We got to do this. I can't believe you're doing that. When is it going to be? Can we try it this way? Can we do it that way? And I took ownership of what was hers. And that's what we have to avoid as higher desire people, because we spent all this time doing all this work, and all of a sudden someone brought something to you, and it is the biggest turn on in the whole entire world, but it sets our minds afire, and we can oftentimes smush out that great small little flame that started up right that we just need to blow lightly on to give a little
You
more
can
oxygen.
suffocate it.
Yeah, we suffocate it. And I totally am bad at that. I am awful at that. And so, yes, as a higher desire person, as your lower desire person is willing to bring things to you, don't suffocate.
Yes. And allow it to be in their own way. I mean, I think often when I was first trying to bring ideas to you, you wanted it in your own language, in your own style, and in your own personality. And it will never be that because I'm not you.
What do you mean when you first bring this? I mean, like this happened last week. So no, where I took it and wanted it in my own way, that I didn't give it room. So I'm saying myself, right?
Oh,
I have to remind myself often. It's not like that was a young thing that happened when we first were exploring and understanding each other's sexuality. It still happens to me now, because us higher desire people, we're constantly thinking about this. Right? We have it played out. And in fact, we just had a conversation about this. Like, even when we talk about it, it's for Amy, it's the feelings that it brings up and the thoughts, and she feels those feelings. And I'm like, babe, it's like a scene being played out in a movie. I can see every little bit of it. And so it's even that different between the two of us. Like, one is literally just bringing in the feelings, and that's what's good about it. And me, it's like, I can see it, what is happening, right? I know in my mind's eye.
And neither is wrong.
Mm-mm.
Nothing is wrong with either one, I just want to say. And that's why I use the word fantasy carefully, because fantasy for a lower desire might just be, I want to feel this way. And fantasy for a higher desire might be that full scene in their head. And neither one is wrong.
No, I just bring it up to remind us higher desire people, like, it's different for them. And if we try to force it into our square hole, into that round, I probably shouldn't use that
No, that's a
terminology.
bad analogy.
Whew, let's not go there. If we
Let's
try
do
to
a different one.
force it to be in that way, we can often smother it. And then the first thing we'll do is we'll smother it, it'll go away. And they spent all that time just lighting that little fire, and we just stomped it out because our burning fire just consumes it. It takes up all the oxygen. So yes.
I think even whether it's images, language, sometimes one spouse or the other has a better use of erotic language or a use of sexual language. It could be thoughts, it could be feelings, it could be just not knowledge of the body and how to use that. And again, you're going to have different capacities on both sides, and it is allowing room for both, room to collaborate in both, and not expecting that one should be the other, but making room for both.
Yep. So if you haven't made it episode 6, hurry up. Well, I guess you're probably not listening to this if you haven't made it episode 6, unless you didn't start at the beginning. But anyway, if you have listened to it and you have some of the same questions that our dear friend has here, please take a moment to stop and think about this. I've spent probably, what has it been, 2 or 3 weeks since this was sent to us, really, really diving in and thinking, what did it look like? And what does it look like? And how can I help someone else ask the right questions to see where they're at? And again, to recap, I really think is to ask yourself, is there shame around my sexuality? If there is, why? And go dig into that, discover that, and that can help you open up and not be ashamed about it. And then when that opens up, don't let it go wild, gangbusters, because the next question is, how do I use this to do good between me, for myself, and the spouse that I partner? And what it like?
I also want to say, back to the original question, the question of disgust. And I want to say that in the brain, disgust and arousal live right next to each other. And so often someone who maybe isn't fully integrated or comfortable in their sexuality yet, their first response will be disgust. And that is also normal. So I want to say that to higher desire spouses, because you are very likely, if you're in, let me say it, to my higher desire spouses, if you were trying to share to a lower desire, it's likely that it's very likely that you will get a disgust response. And I want you to steady yourself through that, because disgust can turn to arousal. It doesn't always, but it can, as a person integrates their sexuality, as they learn to see things in new ways, like have those fundamental shifts like Greg spoke about. When those fundamental shifts happen, disgust can turn to arousal. And I have seen this in many clients, things that they were like, I will never, this is disgusting. How could they? Why would they? And as they start to understand, for the lower desires, often the meanings behind this. I'm going to give a specific example here so I'm not talking so vague. So many of my lower desire spouses do not enjoy oral. They think it's disgusting. They think it's dirty. They think it's full of germs. And from a higher desire perspective, it usually is the most meaningful, the most intimate, sort of like an ultimate sign of cherishing and adoring. And as I share with my lower desire spouses meanings such as that, like when a higher desire is allowed to be a part of any type of oral, they feel this connection, this cherishing, this closeness, this intimacy. And as my lower desire spouses start to understand those meanings, they can shift from disgust to something else. And so it is likely you are going to come across a disgust response if someone is not really in a space to understand their arousal and sexuality yet. And that can also shift.
Yeah. It takes both partners to be able to make this ultimate move. But what I want to say is that any work done for yourself is not given up, right? It's not a waste of time. Oftentimes we work with clients and we don't know whether their spouse is going to shift or whether they're even going to stay with their spouse or what's going to happen in the long term. But the work that we're done with them is important because they're doing it for themselves.
They're developing their sense of self regardless.
And I found it interesting. I didn't set this up, but when I asked Amy, when I said, okay, I talked about, here's all the work we have to do as the higher desire person. Go get your own work done. And I asked Amy the same question, like, what do you do? And the first thing she said, lower desire people, we have work to do ourselves, right? And work on. And no matter what happens, if you work on yourself, you're going to be a better version of yourself, no matter what the outcome of your spouse, because you can't control that other person. But oftentimes you're in a better place to invite them because you're in a place of integrity and honesty and openness about who you are. And that's where we help you get to.
Yes. And it can feel very exposing, very vulnerable, very scary to get to that space. And I think that's part of the discomfort of integration.
And that brings us to the time like, hey, this is what we're here for. All these things are things you can take and run with. Oftentimes what we find in our clients is they've come to that point that it's really hard. And they're at that very moment. We talked about this in the repair, the pattern we talked about, getting to repair. We never get to the repair part because we're in the uncomfortable part and it's too uncomfortable. So we back out and we disengage.
The rupture to repair.
Yeah. And oftentimes this is where we find our clients. And what we can help you do is find ways to say, yes, I am in this very uncomfortable place. I can back out. That's one way to get rid of it, or I can step forward into it. And that's where change happens. And we're here to help you. So please, please, please go like and subscribe to this podcast and then come visit us on linkforlifecoaching.com. We would love to have a free consult with you. Even if it's that free consult, we can go through and find out where you're at. And if nothing else, we can at least put you in the right path. But we'd love to work with you. This is a great work. We're passionate about, we love. Please, we'd love you to come visit us on Link for Life Coaching.
Yes. And thank you for your reviews online. We appreciate those. And thank you for the emails that you send in. You can also always email us. It's either Amy at Linkford Life Coaching or Greg at Linkford Life Coaching. We are happy to hear your questions, your comments, your concerns, to hear any feedback that you have. We really like to have personal contact with our listeners, with our clients. We like to really be there for you.
And if you have friends or couples, they're dealing with this. Whether they're open about it or not, they're dealing with this. And some of the best ways to do it that's not so vulnerable or pushy is to invite them to listen to our podcast because they can listen for themselves and decide. So please share it with all your friends and couples. Our goal is to help as many individual people become better versions of themselves and help them become intimate in their relationships.
Yeah, that's when relationships really thrive.
Yep.
And that's when our families thrive, which helps our communities thrive, which helps businesses thrive. It is really just, in my viewpoint, a crucial foundation for really all of our humankind to thrive.
That's right. All right. Thank you so much for joining. Until next time.
Keep undressing your intimacy.
Bye-bye.